Cultivating the Sociome, Governance Without Governors by Eric Moon. Chapter 4, Value and Price. If we wish to make progress toward a new paradigm of governance, another fundamental concept we must understand is value, what it is and how it comes into existence. Value is a key concept for us to understand because in the broadest sense it is value that keeps us going, helps us to create progeny, and gives us opportunities to make our lives better. And more value is better than less value, which provides us with a reliable guide to decision making as long as we understand what value is and what it is not. As recently as a few hundred years ago, economists were positing two different types of value and having a lot of difficulty reconciling them: value in use and value in exchange. How could water, for example, have an exchange value at or near zero, while diamonds exchange for great sums of money, even though water, being essential for life, has greater use value? Economist Adam Smith called this the paradox of value, and he and other early economists did not succeed in producing a satisfactory explanation for the phenomenon. Economist Karl Marx concluded that the paradox of value was merely an example of the contradictions that inevitably arise in a capitalist system and made no attempt to resolve it, apparently establishing grounds for condemnation of what he called capitalism was the important point as far as he was concerned. Later economists, however, did resolve the problem as part of the marginal revolution in the study of economics, which began in the late 19th century and introduced the concept of utility. The resolution rested on the realization that value in exchange depends on marginal utility and that value in use rests on total utility. There is no paradox. The reason that water generally has so little exchange value is its abundance. At the margin, one additional unit of water adds very little to someone's total utility. And the reason that diamonds have so much more exchange value than water is that diamonds are not as abundant as water. At the margin, one additional diamond adds a lot to someone's total utility. So prices, exchange values, reflect marginal utility and not total utility. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Early attempts to get a grip on the concept of value centered around labor. Under a labor theory of value, the proposition is that the value of something is equal to the value of the labor that went into its production. Or, as Adam Smith framed it, the value of something is equal to the value of the labor that someone must perform in order to earn enough to buy it. Although there is some plausibility to the musings about labor being the source of value, not everything that needs to fit into the conceptual framework of a labor theory of value actually fits. Most notably, we are obliged to explain how the value of the man-made inputs to the production process, sometimes referred to as the means of production or real capital, fits into this conceptual framework. Clearly, a laborer coupled with inputs such as machines can produce far more than a laborer working without those inputs. A farmer with a tractor can till more acreage than a farmer with a sharp stick. We can try to rescue the labor theory by proposing that the value of capital inputs just reflects the labor that was used to produce those inputs. This claim, though, seems a bit preposterous on its face on account of the magnitude of the additional output the capital input enables, compared to the relatively small value of the labor it took to produce the capital good. Marx's labor theory of value, and with it pretty much all of Marx's theory, was dealt a fatal blow during the marginal revolution when Austrian economist Eugen von Bimm-Bawerk pointed out an unresolvable contradiction in Marx's work involving what became known as the transformation problem. And American economist Paul Samuelson, a towering figure in the profession in the mid-20th century, demonstrated mathematically that Marx's theory was internally contradictory. Samuelson called Marx's attempt to resolve the transformation problem an algebraic illusion. Later on, he even remarked that Marx's theory was a swan song of an outdated paradigm because marginalist economics could generate consistent value-price relationships while Marx's labor theory could not. As we all know now, of course, the labor theory of value, though dead, has not remained in its grave. It has become an undead idea and still wanders the land, eating people's brains. To a disciple of Marx, the labor theory of value simply must be true in order to support the desired conclusion, which is that the workers are producing all of the surplus value and that the owners of capital are taking what rightly belongs to the workers when they receive profits over and above the value of the labor embodied in the capital. And this failure by the followers of Marx to acknowledge clear facts and sound reasoning defines the point where Marxism began to segue from serious political and economic inquiry into the quasi-religious doctrine we observe today, which I have begun calling Marxianity. Adherents to the labor theory of value have clung to the conclusion of their argument in spite of the fact that the argument itself has been shown to be fatally flawed. And the backpedaling and revisionism displayed by these disciples and their ability to discover class struggle wherever they look have been quite impressive. We can gain insight into the way Marxianity has evolved and into its ongoing appeal from the writings of American author Michael Shermer, who argued in his book, The Believing Brain, that the same mental processes underlie such things as religious beliefs, belief in conspiracy theories, grand social theories, and political ideologies. Shermer pointed out that the human brain is pattern-seeking. We're hardwired to find order, structure, and causality, and we find these things even in data and anecdotes that are actually random. And then we tend to imagine that intentional actors lie behind the imagined patterns. These evolved tendencies might have improved our odds of survival in earlier times, but they can misfire in modern settings and lead to all sorts of mischief. Marxian ideologues who retain the labor theory of value do so not because it is compelling, but because it supports a normative critique of capitalism which they treat as dogma. And it's not even entirely clear what the capitalism labor refers to. Abandoning the labor theory of value would fatally undermine the basis of the assertions about exploitation, surplus value, the wage-profit frontier, and class conflict. And as with religion or conspiracy theory, the appeal lies not so much in the validity of the explanation as in the emotional certainty it provides, and in the sense of membership in a community where everyone sees things as they really are. Marxianity continues to inspire, in spite of having no intellectual foundation, precisely because of how our brains have evolved to form beliefs. In spite of its obsolescence in the world of science, the labor theory of value is still quite influential in areas of endeavor where doing good science is not the point. There can be little doubt that this concept will eventually go the way of the geocentric model of the universe, but it presently retains its grip, probably because it can serve as the foundation for many simple, easy-to-understand, wrong answers to complex questions in political economy. Well, let's move on and say more about the subjective theory of value that emerged from the marginalist revolution. The subjective theory of value says that things don't have an objective intrinsic worth. Instead, their value of things is continuously socially constructed. The value of a thing depends on how strongly people want the thing, and how strongly they want it compared to how much they want substitutes. In a modern economy, we don't each trade directly with others based on our personal wants as we might have done in older times under a barter system. Instead, we now mostly use a price system of resource allocation. It has been quipped that if the ancient Greeks had understood the price system, they would have deified it, such is its power as a spontaneous coordination mechanism. Prices act like a set of signals that are useful, even vital, to both buyers and sellers. When something is in short supply, or if lots of people want that something, some of them will be willing to pay more to get it, which pushes its price up. This price increase acts as an automatic dampener on the quantity demanded, as fewer and fewer of those at the margin are willing to pay an increasingly higher price. The higher price also acts as a signal to suppliers to produce more. When fewer people want it, or when it's very plentiful, the price falls, and the lower price acts as a signal to suppliers to produce less and a signal to consumers to buy more. Theorists tell us, and it has been repeatedly demonstrated, that a price system operates in a way that discovers distributed information more quickly and completely than can be matched by any other method of gathering information that we know of. Witness, for example, the success of prediction markets in outperforming pollsters when it comes to calling elections. Behavioral economists, such as Nobel laureate Vernon L. Smith, have demonstrated how a pricing system routinely discovers distributed information about values and prices in an experimental setting that mimics real-world activity. A market translates millions of individual subjective judgments of value into one clear signal, which we call the market price, a consensus estimate of value. Knowledge of the price of a resource guides decisions about how much of the resource should go where. If apartment rent rises, for example, it's a sign that more people want apartments, or that there's a shortage of apartments at the lower rent. Renters notice this signal and adjust. They might stop looking, they might look for substitutes, or they might just pay the higher rent. At the same time, builders are incentivized to bring more apartments to market. So the price system works as a kind of automatic coordination mechanism. Nobody has to know of or agree on exactly why people want what they want. Each person just acts on their own preferences. A market price reflects all of that scattered, subjective information and guides resources towards their most highly valued uses. The same reasoning applies to wages, which is what we call the price of labor. Just like with goods, the value of someone's work isn't fixed in the job itself. Instead, it ultimately depends on how much people, in this case employers, customers, or society at large, subjectively value what that work produces. If, for example, lots of people want fancy coffee drinks and are willing to pay high prices for them, then coffee shops can afford to hire more baristas. But since making lattes is a skill many people can learn quickly, the wage for that work tends to remain modest. If there's a sudden boom in demand for computer chips, the work of skilled chip designers becomes very valuable to companies. And because chip design is not a skill many people can learn quickly, and because firms are competing to hire them, wages for chip engineers rise. The price system coordinates all of this automatically. Wages function as a translation of subjective value into the incentives that face both workers and employers. By looking at the wages that are offered, workers learn where their time and skills are most valued. By looking at their success in attracting workers, employers learn the amount of wages they must offer to attract the workers they wish to hire. And thus, society's limited pool of human effort gets directed towards the tasks that all of us together value most highly, even though no central authority has to, or can, decide who should work where. It is response to natural incentives that direct the energy flows in a market economy. The energy flows organize the sociome and cause the system to function in such a way that value is produced efficiently, that is, getting the most bang for the buck, and to work automatically as long as most of us, most of the time, respect property rights and the sanctity of the contract. And as long as we have a legal system that enforces these things in the relatively rare circumstances where people do not respect them. Governance, mostly without a governor. And perhaps just as importantly, in a market economy, we're all free to follow the hardwired, evolved impulses of generosity and benevolence most of us feel towards those among us who find themselves in unfortunate circumstances through no fault of their own and who deserve our help. And without any governors to preempt our decisions and take a cut for themselves, we can send our help in the direction we choose. We should note that the issue of caring for the less fortunate has been a sticking point for the increasing numbers of people who have at least begun acknowledging the ability of a market economy to create wealth, like no other system we know, but who are concerned that a market economy might be a heartless system in practice, and that those in need would be neglected and abandoned. Many of us seem to have trouble believing that the needy would be adequately cared for unless the care is the responsibility of the institution of government. But the fact is that before the relatively recent development of state-sponsored welfare, the needy were cared for by various private arrangements. And even if some people slipped through the cracks and did not receive care, we have to acknowledge that some people still slip through the cracks. And evidence suggests that the current systems are more vulnerable to cheaters and free riders than the older systems. We do not want to compare actual private welfare with a perfect alternative. We want to compare it with an actual alternative if we want the comparison to be meaningful. Let's not sacrifice an actual good because of an imaginary perfect. And given the enormously greater value that is generated in a modern market economy than in earlier times, private welfare arrangements are likely to be even more effective than earlier private welfare arrangements. We should not let overblown doubts about the care of the less fortunate stand in the way of achieving governance without governors. We can all be better off. Next up, Chapter 5, Property.